Okay, so last week we were talking about on page Kuf we brought the morale. So we'll just to recap, we learned that there were six Shavuos, really. Okay, that's the Gemara taught us that there were really six Shavuos, even though it says there were three. It says but three times, but each one is doubled. Im ta'iru v'im taruru, and the content of those six Shavuos were. Let's just look at the Gemara again on page Kuf Yutes and Kuf Chaf. At the bottom of Kuf Yutes are the first three Shavuos, right? Gimel Shavuos, right at the bottom, right? Gimel Shavuos haloma lach loma. Why do we have these three Shavuos? Achas shelo yalu Yisrael b'choma, that they shouldn't go en masse to conquer Eretz Yisrael. So that was a shavua about the Golus. That we should stay in the Golus and not rebel against the Goyim, but we should accept our lot as being exiled. And the third one was that the Goyim shouldn't make life too difficult for the Jews in Golus. So those are the three shavuos that have to do with the Golus. And then the Gemara said there's another three, if you turn the page, and on the top of page Kuf Chaf, excuse me, right? And those have to do with the Kates, right? So one is Shelo Yigalu Es HaKates, on the top of the first line there. They shouldn't reveal the Kates. If anybody knows it, right, they shouldn't be revealed. V'shelo Yirachaku Es HaKates, V'shelo Yigalu Asod Levikachovim. And there's two others. Lo Yirachaku Es HaKates, they shouldn't make it distant, push it off, make it further away, and they shouldn't reveal the sod, right, the secret to the goyim. And so those are three shvuos which have to do with the kates. So shelo yigalu es kates. Right? So the maral at the bottom of the page is what we did last time. I'm not going to go through it inside, but the maral explains. Right? If you go on the bottom of page Kuf Chaf, if you look 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the bottom of the page and of Kuf Chaf, under Maral, the Lashon of the Maral, Leficha Chosiv Od Shalosh Shvuos, they added another 3 Shvuos. V'achas Shelo Yigalu HaKetz. He says why? No, says the Maral, Ki Kasher Yigalu HaKetz Areish Kan Geula. Because the revelation of when the case is going to come, that's already equivalent, tantamount to having a geula. Somebody who knows when he's going to be God, so that's already built into his existence is a geula, right? Because he knows that when it's just a question of what we'd call in halacha a mechusar zman. It's just something which takes time, right? It's the time hasn't arrived, but it's going to come. So if I know exactly when it's going to come, it's already a geula. Vashem yizbarach sama galut lo yen nimsa ketz kodem zmano. There's a galut, so you can't have an early ketz. L'chichach al yigalu ketz. Okay, and then he says at the top of the next page, Kuf Chaf Aleph, the next shvua is v'chein shelo yitchaku es haketz. They shouldn't be dochik it, in other words, force it to come. Perish laviat haketz shelo bizmano, to bring the ketz not in the right time, right? Al yedei tefillah v'rachamim, which is what Rashi said, that we shouldn't be involved in forcing the ketz, pushing it, right, like forcing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hand. We have to say, let HaKadosh Baruch Hu take his time and bring the ketz, at the time that he sees fit, without our intervention. And evidently we would have certain abilities to intervene, right, through tfilos and tachanunim, but it's not appropriate that we do so. Because Baruch Hu gave us a shavua. Don't do that. Okay. So that's the second of the third set. That's the second of the second set of shavuos. And now he's going to and then. Okay. Okay, so now let's start the new section, right? And that's the And that let's start. Let's do a new section at the bottom of Kuf Chaf Aleph. I have to start someplace. Richuk haketz de giluya. I think this is as far as we got on the last year, right? Ubeinyan dechikas haketz. So remember, there was the second of the shvuos of the second set of shvuos was not to be dochekas haketz, which means not to force the hand. So Kasav Kamaral Kiper Shasheni Barashi. So here the Maral in the Sefer Netzach, right? He says he explains like the second shot of Rashi. Shlo yitchaku et haketz al yidei atfilos. Right. But then there's a question because the Maral in another place seems to have a different shot. Because Omnam Besof Ksuvos Nire, right, in the Maral and the Chedush HaGodos at the end of Ksuvos, it seems, Sheholech Yedeya Rishona, Shelo Yerachaku Es HaKetz, there, he's Gores Shelo Yerachaku Es HaKetz. Okay? V'zel Lashona. Uchmo she'elu gimel shvul shelo yasu shinui begolus al yedei hashlosha dvarim. The first set of three shvuos was not to make any changes in the golus. Right? Gozer aleim gam ken shelo yishanu Yisrael beketz. We also can't change the ketz. In other words, the golus has to be. We're commanded. We're sworn by oath that that we maintain the golus in its form and not try to tamper with it, not try to intervene in the process of golus, but let the golus run its course. And the other three shvuos are shelo yishanu Yisrael beketz, that the ketz has a certain reality, a certain form, and we shouldn't tamper with the ketz. We can't tamper with try to affect and intervene in the golus, or not, nor shall we intervene in the ketz. Ki yeh davar omed kasher gazar Hashem yitbarach. Right, that the Maral there writes that things should stand the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed. Bein begalut or bein beketz. Both elements. Right, there's that we're sworn to maintain the golus, and we're sworn to not intervene to bring about the ketz in a way which is not in keeping with the gzeira of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki kasher mevakshim legalot haketz, because when you want to reveal the ketz, hemerachakim haketz legamrei, we are pushing it off completely. Ki gilui haketz marchik hagula shelo tavo, because when we reveal the ketz, it pushes it off and makes it not happen. It pushes it further away. Every time we have the Gila case, and Ramesh will explain exactly how that happens or what the mechanics of there are. But that's what the Maral says, that the more Gila there is, the more openness, the more clarity we have about the Kates, then that is itself a cause to push off the Kates. Kedisa b'chelek, this is the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Ar Sugya. The Rav Ashkach Rabbanan, he has a gear. So Rav Ashkach Rabbanan have a mishto minei the Mashiach. They were talking about Mashiach. Please do not push him off. And they shouldn't force the kates to bring the kates before his man. Okay, so here he is gores, right? That they should not yirachaku et haketz, right? That the Gilui haketz is marchik the gula, as opposed to the earlier girsa, which was yitchaku es haketz, right? Now, Rabbi Moshe explains that there's no contradiction. It's very simple, because Rashi, when he said yirachaku es haketz, right, he meant Rashi. The first parish of Rashi was the parish of Rashi of yirachaku es haketz was through our sins. We shouldn't cause the kates to be pushed off through our sins. But he's saying the moral, whether you're gores yirachaku or yitchaku, but it really, there's no contradiction, because yitchaku means to force it to happen, and yirachaku also means that through the gilui, it's also trying to bring it about. And so there's two different ways of trying to manipulate that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring about the kates, either through tfilos, that's yitchaku es kates. That's what the Maral says in Sefer Netzach, following the second Shan Rashi, or Yirchaku es haketz through the Gilui. And because the more that there is a Gilui, so the more there will be a richuk of the case. Right. So he says, it's not a contradiction. He says, right, he didn't mean say that richuk is because of the sins. It's because you're so involved with the gilui of the kates, that's going to push off the kates. Whether you're involved in the dechikat kates, which is like doing more than the appropriate amount of tefillos for the kates, trying to push it to happen, or the gilui kates, or revealing it, those are both things which cause the geula to be pushed off. The two things are complete each other. It's because we have to maintain the goals, and therefore we can't be dochik be dochik the kates. V'chivin shenigzer gzera shel golos, az af im yizkel amor al kates nachom amiti. Right? Even if you figure it out, right? Even if you figure out a true kates, al karchachu yidche, it's going to be pushed off. Kivin shemu yeh nachon nimsa she'en kan golos. It's exactly the point. The point is that, again, we're assuming that, let's just for clarity, we're assuming, as we're going to say, right, that when we say that there were many, when we talk about kates, we mean two different things. Meaning, right, there are the possible kates, and there's the ultimate day of the Yom HaPla'ot, the day which is the ultimate kates. So when people were calculating the kates, right, if they're coming up with a vadai date, right, for the kates, so then they're saying is that this is the date, right, and right, so it's not one of the possibilities. If they're saying this is the vadai possibility, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says no, right, right. Even if it was a possible kates, the one that you're pointing out, and even if there is maybe a pshat in the psukim which will say that is the case, that could be the case, but the minute you reveal that, you make that available to everybody to know, that's going to be something which is going to say, to use a slang word, is going to jinx it, right? It's going to make it not happen because the Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't want people to know, right? So if you say, oh, I can figure out that the year, 1522, if we were back in the 1300s or something, or 1400s, is going to be a case. So then because Baruch Hu didn't want us to know that. So then that's dafka going to make that year not be a case. Okay, so we have to, okay, right, so we can't. The ultimate case is going to come. That the final date is going to come, right? And that we can't. That's not going to get pushed off just because we figure it out, right? But the intermediate cases could be pushed off. So that's what Rava was saying, right? That by your talking about the kates too much, right? What you're doing is that you're taking away, you're removing the possibility from a given case, right? Maybe there would have been a date which would have been a possible case, but you're making it impossible for that to happen because you're creating a situation where people will know the end of the golus, and if they know the end of the golus, then there's something wrong with the golus. So therefore, best is not to try to do it again. But that's the chiluk that we've been saying all along. The chiluk is that if you're doing it b'toras varai, it's bad. If you're doing it b'toras sofek, that's okay. In other words, if you're saying there's a possibility, okay, if it's a possibility, so then the fact that it's a possibility, so that's not going to push off the case. People aren't going to say, "Oh, it's all clear. I know exactly what's going to be." It's a possibility, right? Even a possibility, but that's not going to do the damage. But if it's okay, so that's the way that we're explaining this thing. Okay, so now so let's start the new paragraph. Umidbaer midivrei Amaral. Omek b'avanat divrei Reb Zera. Shema she'amar, when he said b'mtuta me'ina min eichel otechakua, when he said please don't get involved with this because you're going to push it off. Umipnei sheyedias haketzi stira legolus. It's a stira, right? Knowing the Kates is a contradiction to being in Golus. V'kiven shekach, gzerat hagalut machricha lidchot et haKates od v'od. And so therefore, the fact that there is a gzera of Golus, right, forces the fact that we have to push off the Kates. Because because the existence of a known Kates is going to, right, is going to be make the present situation not a real Golus, because who wants the present situation to be a real Golus, so he's going to say, okay, right. So whatever thoughts you had about when it could have been a Kates, that's not going to happen, right? Because I want you to be in Golus, right? So the less you try to give a date to these possible cases, so the more possible it is that one of them will be actually turned into a real case. Right? But if you give times to it, so then it's not going to work. V'nimsa od, and it turns out, she'etzem divrei Reb Zera nichlalim b'azarat hakatuv b'gimel shvuos, and Reb Zera was really right exactly saying what it says in the Gimel Shvuos. Im ta'iru v'im te'oreru et ahava ad shetechpatz. If you arouse and awaken the love ad shetechpatz until before shetechpatz, until it's the desired time, until there's a zman shetechpatz, when it's a desired time. But if you try to make it happen earlier than that desired time, so then Kodesh Baruch Hu made us take a shvuah not to do that. And if we violate that shvuah, so then the consequence of that violation is going to be that case that you tried, that you thought what could have been, and maybe it could have been, won't happen. Dafka, because you figured it out. So the more you figure it out, right, the more it's not going to happen. And Moshe used a strong language here. Right? Not only did he personally transgress the shvuah, od ha'arich galutam shel Yisrael. He prolonged the galus. V'arehu mitchayev midin rodef al kol klal Yisrael. He's a rodef, right? Because he revealed something which had better not been revealed, right? Because by the etzem revelation, he made it not happen. Okay? And that's something that we have to. I mean, it's a deep lesson that not everything that we know is it kedai to share with people, because sometimes the knowledge is going to be counterproductive. Because sometimes when people know what's going to happen, it's going to make it not happen, right? And so therefore we should be very careful, and that's the content of this shvuah, according to the way the Maharal explaining it, the way Rav Moshe is bringing it down. Okay, so that's the third shvuah. Okay, so that's really now Rav Moshe is going to go into a even deeper understanding of this, but that's so far that's the inyan of the six shvuos, 3 shvuos to maintain how we're supposed to behave in the golus, and 3 shvuos about not intervening, not tampering with the kates, leaving it be as it is, because the more we get involved with it, the more we could push it off. Okay. Now we still have, again, he's going to come back to, and so what is the good way to do it? Okay, the good way, as we said. So again, he's working with the basic structure that he said in the previous shur that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. He's working with the basic structure is that the more tentative your involvement with this is, the better off you are. Right? And he says dafka, right? And we'll see that dafka at this tentative kind of involvement with figuring out the case is a very positive thing, because it makes us expecting the case. It turns our direction to the case, because if we don't have our faces, if we're not pointing in the direction of the case, so that's also very bad. In other words, to ignore the fact that there will be a case, right, means that we're ignoring the fact that we have to expect and want and desire with all our hearts and all our souls that the Mashiach should come. Right? That's so we have to be in this very, very kind of tightrope kind of situation. Not too much and not too little. Don't ignore it, because then then your belief in Mashiach is one of the Yugimel Ikrim, right? Ani mani meviach Mashiach, and as Rav Moshe says, right, that the Vias HaMashiach has to be with tzipisa legula, right? So we have to be mitzapim, we have to be mechake, we have to wait for it, we have to expect it, we have to long for it, right? Somebody who lives in this world and doesn't long for, doesn't look forward to, doesn't think that it's an absolute necessity for the welfare of the world that Mashiach come, so then he's sinning against one of the 12th of the 13th principles of the 13 principles of faith. Right? So on the one hand, we have to be constantly facing it and looking for it and thinking about it, right? And on the other hand, we have to be constantly be not fully involved and not trying to pin it down, because the more we pin it down, right, the worse it'll be, because dafka through that act of pinning it down, we'll make it not happen. So that's the dichotomy, and that's the balance that we have to have in terms of these things.
Rabbi, okay. What constitutes a prayer? Does a song constitute a prayer, or like a Chabad jingle, like we want Mashiach now and we don't want to wait? Like what constitutes a prayer in this case?
So yes, again, as we said earlier, right? Of course, the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, Chazal, in our daily prayers, we talk about, we have 3 times a day in our Shemona Esrei. We ask for the Mashiach to come. It's Samach David Avdecha Me'erat Hatzmiach. We ask for the Mashiach to come, and definitely we have to pray for it, right? And I think that a Chabad jingle is probably harmless, right? I don't know if it helps, but I don't know if it hurts, right? Probably not something that is too earth shaking, right? But again, if you have perhaps we have great holy people who know certain secrets in Kabbalah and how the world works, and they could put themselves in a corner and pray and fast for days and nights and in order to influence the cosmic effects, to change the Seder of Dvarim. Right? That's already something which, according to what we're learning, is something which is not a desirable thing to do. We have a shvua not to do this. So where you and I are in the balance, we're not on that level that we can have such powerful tefillos that we're going to do it. And on the other hand, we have to constantly being waiting and thinking about how much we really desire the Mashiach to come. Okay, so now let's go a little bit weiter and try to finish as much as we can of this inyan, and we'll see how much we're going to do. I don't know if we're going to finish the whole year, but I don't know if we'll see. And I don't want to make predictions about what we're going to do, because every time I make a prediction what we're going to do, I always wind up doing something else. Okay, so no more predictions. Haketz mukrach. So there's no vaday ketz to this, our involvement in this sugi of ketz. Okay. Haketz mukrach mitzad ha'olam. Okay. So this is a very important section. The ketz mukrach. It must be mitzad ha'olam. Right? Okay. What does that mean? ומתוך דברים אלה נראה לבאר עומק נוסף בעניין חיש והקץ של ספר דניאל שעסקו בו הרמב"ם וראשונים, right? And he says we're going to understand something more deeper, right? About the חיש והקץ of Sefer Daniel, which the Ramban and other Rishonim were involved with. They were osek in it. ונבין במה חלוקה סוגיה זו מסוגיית גילי קץ ודחיקת הקץ. And why is what they were doing okay? That's one sugya. The sugya there's a sugya of being involved in making drashot on the psukim, trying to understand what the hidden messages of those psukim, and that's good. That's what the Ramban did. And the other sugya is, but don't do gili ketz and dechika ketz. And included in the whole sugya of Gila case, these 3 shvuos that we just talked about, and Rabbi Zera's admonition to the Talmidim not to be involved with V'ketzad mishtalvot hasugyot halalu l'dor echad. Now, Rav Moshe is trying to make the grand conciliation between these sugyas, right? Don't push too hard, right? But be involved. Okay. Ubitchila. So he says, Narchiv babim b'meshen itbayer le'el b'inyan haketz. We're going to talk about something which we already spoke about in the previous year, right? Shir Maimer Yud Gimel. She'akadosh Baruch Hu tava et haketz b'metziut ha'olam. A very, very important thing, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu tava, right, made it as part of the teva. Right? He made it. He imprinted it, right? Not the beah is a coin, right? He imprinted, right, the kates in the mitziut ha'olam, in the reality of the world. Okay, in Yanohu, kimoshe kasuv, kates sam lachoshech. Right? There's an end. HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed. I mentioned this the last chapter. There should be sam with a sin, not sham right. So it's a typo which was repeated twice. Kates sam lachoshech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed an end to the darkness. That means shakates ganuz be'etzem etziut olam. What that means is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the choshech is the mitziut of the world in its gashmi form. Right? The world is right. There's or and there's choshech. There's the spirit. There's the ruchnius and there's the gashmius. Right? The gashmius, which is if it's left on its own, is dark. Right? It's dark. It drags us down. It blinds us. It does not. We can't see the truth. Right? The gashmius. The or is the spiritual truth. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a world of choshech, right? The world has choshech in it, right? Which of course was aggravated and exacerbated by Adam Rishon's chait and other chatoim, which brought more and more choshech into the world. And theoretically, it would have been possible to have a world where there would have been just a minimal amount of choshech, but that's not the way it worked out. So, but there's a case. The choshech has built into it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world for a purpose that the choshech is not meant to endure. The choshech is meant to end, to come to an end and evaporate and leave us in the world of or and leave us in the world of light. So that's what we have to understand, that this is built into the world, right? When we live in a world which is headed towards the light, right? Where the darkness is headed towards its disappearance. That's the nature of the Brias HaOlam. She'aketz ganuz be'etzem etziut ha'olam. Klomar, ha'olam mitzad atzmo nivra ba'ofen sheyesh lo sof v'tachlit. The world was created for a purpose. It has an end, and it has a happy end. Right? It can't forever be in its present state of darkness. Whereas we have to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world to have that there should be an ideal world the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the world, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world so that it will happen. Right? In His infinite wisdom, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it that we have the possibility of chait, and through the possibility of chait, we bring more and more darkness into the world. And that in no way predicts chas v'sholom that there's going to be a permanent situation, right? It's just right different layers of darkness which will be peeled away until HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals the ultimate light. But that's part of the bria, right? And that's very, very important. Okay. Vine. Right. Again, I mentioned last couple of weeks ago when Moshe mentioned this point in an earlier chapter that it's the same kind of idea for Tchias HaMesim. I mentioned that Baruch Hu, right? There will be Tchias HaMesim because the Baruch Hu created the human being for a purpose. Right? He created us to be the ideal human being, and there's no way after the Chet of Adam Rishon that there can be an ideal human being in this Gashmi Zdika world. We can be We can strive. We can reach. A person can, if he works hard, he can reach higher levels of kedusha and closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, there's people who are, sunk and stuck in the darkness, and there are people who certainly move up the ladder towards what a human being should look like. But no human being can accomplish in this world what a human being is supposed to look like. That's only going to happen after the death of the body and the reconstruction, resurrection of the person. That's the same kind of idea. That whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, he created because there's an ideal picture in his mind of what he wants, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being omnipotent, right, is going to make that happen. Right? It's not. He did not leave that up to us about whether it will happen or not. Right? That's the yichud that the Ramchal talks about. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when and how. But okay, so that's what we have to understand. So now let's continue the next paragraph. So that ketz means that geula must come. It's ganuz, it's hidden, it's embedded, maybe is a better word, in the world. It's got to be that there's got to be a geula, because because the darkness has got to come to an end. Whereas if geula was something external, right, something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, something, if things work out, right, I'll bring the geula. If there's some kind of awakening, we'll make it happen. We'll do mitzvahs. We'll do something, but it's something which could happen, but it's not something which has to happen. Right? Something like you promise your kid, if you're good, I'll take it to the ball game or something, right? I'll do something for you, right? That's okay. It could happen, or it could not happen, right? That's not the way it is, because there would be no necessity for it to happen. It would be dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon at that time. It would be shaykh to lose it. Right? In other words, maybe, again, there is one Mandi Omar in the Gemara, right, who says, "Ein Moshiach Yisrael." Says Mashiach isn't going to come. We've lost the opportunity, right? And it's a good thing we don't paskin like him, right? Because we'd all be we're pretty looking around us and seeing things going down the tubes, and deteriorating, step after step, as the way we learned in the earlier chapters, as was predicted by Chazal in the door of Mashiach. If we didn't have a promise of that there was going to be an end to the Golus, then we would be really in a state of yush, right? Where are we going from here? So the only thing that's holding us together is the fact that we know that there's going to be geula. Right? Okay? And he quotes a medrash Tilim. Vayar batzar lahem b'shamot rinatam. Right? Tilim Kuvav. Right? It says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw, right, the mizmor of the people who have to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Arba tzrichim l'hodot. Vayar batzar lahem. He saw them in their troubles. B'shamot rinatam. He heard their tefillos. Amar B'lozer ein yisrael nigalim ela mitoch hamisha dvarim. Geula, right, requires 5 conditions. Mitoch tzara, there's got to be a troubles, right? Baruch Hashem Yotze. Umitoch tefillah, there's got to be tefillas, right? We have to have tefillas for the geula. Right? Again, we have to, as we said a few minutes ago, we have to know the balance and the measure. But certainly, we have to constantly be davening for the geula, right? At least 3 times a day, and umitoch zchut avot, right? The zchut avot, right? Umitoch tshuva, okay? Umitoch haketz. And so Moshe is emphasizing these words. What does it mean? Mitoch haketz. Dahainu, shetzarich kates kedei ligael. There's got to, in other words, there has to be a concept that the darkness has an end to it. It's not infinite. It's not forever. Ubali kates en geula. Musag ketz, he brings a couple of Lashonos or Misholim. Where do we see the word ketz? Ukoloshan HaPasuk, right? That we read in the Parsha Shavuot, on Parshas Bo. Vahi miketz shloshim shana v'arba me'ot shana. Vahi, it says miketz at the end of 430 years. Vahi betz me'yom hazeh. Yatzu kol tzivot Hashem Eretz Mitzrayim. All the hosts of Hashem who left Eretz Mitzrayim. Leil shimurim hu l'Hashem. It was a night of shimurim. Right? A night that was looked forward to, that was promised. There was something that it was already built into the system that there was going to be a night of Geula. And it says it's a Leil Shimurim for all of Klal Yisrael. So we still, remember that today, that the Leil HaSeder, right, which is about 6 weeks away from us, right, is something which is built into the system. That there's going to, there was a case to the goals of Mitzrayim. In other words, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said in the Bris Ben Absarim that, right, Ger Yez Erecha Be'eretz Lehem, V'avadum v'yinu otam arba me'et shema, they'll be enslaved and afflicted for 400 years, right, and then they're going to go out. There was a case embedded in that. It was not something that was meant to be indefinite. Dahainu haketzu leil shimurim, which means zman sheshamur legula, shaz be'echrachi tavo. Okay, and that's what the Arkates say. There, Moshe makes a very important point in the parentheses here. It doesn't contradict our emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could jump, right? Right? Just like he jumped at the time of Pesach, he could jump on the mountains, right? Skip over the hills and bring a geula ahead of time. Whereas HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the infinite power, and if he decided, something, this is getting ridiculous. I'm not going to wait till the Kates. I'm going to just be done with it. Right? Let's just bring the geula for a time. That could be. We don't have to come to the point where the world has to be redeemed, where things are so bad that the next we hit rock bottom. Okay. Seder. Then he brings another example, the next paragraph. Shekatav al Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippur, Yom HaKippurim, Huzman Tshuva L'chol Yachid. Very instructive example here. Yom Kippurim is a time of Tshuva, L'chol, for everybody, L'yachid V'Lerabim, for the individual and for the tzibur, V'hu Kates Mechila V'Slicha L'Yisrael. It's the Kates of the time of forgiveness. Uperish Hadavar. Shegam Yom Kippur Dome L'Kates B'Zeh Shezeh Sof HaMalach. Right? Yom Kippur is also, right, similar to this, and that's the end of a process. Right? Umisha rotzeli yishaer b'chayim, right? And somebody wants to stay alive, lo yachol yishaer im chet achar Yom Kippur. You can't be there. You can't have a chet after Yom Kippur. It has to be a time of atonement, repentance. V'im lo asa tshuva. And if he didn't do the tshuva, who nichtav and nichtav lemisa, that he's written and sealed for death. Umikal haba, if he yaseh tshuva, right, and if afterwards he does tshuva after Yom Kippur, zemoil rakshi yeh bal tshuva al chatayim. He'll be a bal tshuva for seder. Right? Okay, so you won't be punished for those sins. Aval the gzar din lo yachol larid, but you can't take off the gzar din. Umifurish bebraysa, hashav ben atayim mochlim lo. If you do tshuva in between, in the meanwhile, meaning until Yom Kippur, right? It says in Rosh Hashanah you're written, and everybody, and it says the Beinonim are hanging in the balance, Tluyim v'Omdim, and the Gemara says if you do tshuva in the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, then you'll be forgiven, right? But Lo Shah Beinatayim, if you didn't, Afilu Evi Kol Ele Nevayot Shebalam. He brought all the rams of Nevayot. In Tanakh, where somebody had a lot of possessions and flocks and things, he brought them all. Ein mochlin, right? Okay. V'zed domel l'sugya shelanu, and this is like our sugya. Shekamoshi yesh kates lechoshech, yesh kates legalut, yesh kates gam lekabel shavim. Right. So I think what he means is he's saying is where if you're contemplating this a little bit, that what he's saying is somebody who sins is also exiled into a darkness. Right? He's in choshech. Right? He carries with him a sin, but built into the darkness of that sin is the redemption of tshuva. That's you have the possibility. There's a case. You can do tshuva. In other words, a person is in a sinful state, but we have a promise from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that again, here we have to do our share is to have a case to the darkness. So there's a case of the Golus. There's a case to the Choshech, right? There's a case to the Golus of Mitzrayim, and there's a case. But we have to know that all negative things in this world are here only temporarily. There's no such thing as something being permanently bad. Right? Okay, and some say sometimes a person is a sinner, so has to be punished, right? But the situation will be permanently bad as it can be. So he says, "Ve'alzeh gufa yitbayer b'maral le'el." Next paragraph, "Sheparshah Gates galut ze parsha b'fnei atzma." There's a separate parsha of Kates. V'yesh gimel shvuot eich leitnaheg im galut. 3 shvuos about how to behave with the galut. V'gimel shvuot eich leitnaheg im haketz. Ki haketz hu etzem mitziut hagula. The Kates is the Geula. V'chol echad me'ela gimel pogim b'Kates u'marachkim oto. And of the second set of 3, right? Any one of them negatively affects the Kates and distances it. Okay. I'm skipping the parentheses there. He says, "V'maral," just read the parentheses. "V'maral shom mechadesh ech gilui kol sod l'umot olam gam archikat haketz." Okay, there's a long footnote here, which I'm going to try to summarize at the bottom here and chet. Right? But he says the Maral will explains how is revealing secrets, right? Something which pushes off the Kates. But Moshe didn't go into this year, but the editor did do us the favor of quoting the Maral. It's all included as that love of Kodesh Baruch Hu to us and us to Kodesh Baruch Hu is going to have to be revealed. But you can't arouse it early. That's what I said before. There's 2 types of kates. There's yesh harbe kitzim b'sefer d'luim shebetluim b'schus. There are many possible kitzim in Sefer Daniel which are dependent upon our merits. There's a time when all the kitzim are over, right? But there's many. Yesh ketz acharon shezeh tarich mesuyam she'ez hagula chayevet lavo. But there's a case, a last case. Right? Okay, and so Ella. Okay, so there's one paragraph here, and this will clarify this. She'enam sugyot shonot legamrei. In other words, the fact that there were many kitzim, right, and the fact that there is a final kates are not 2 separate sugyos. Meaning, kol kitzin halalu, all of the possible kitzim that we were speaking about, hem gam bechinot shonot shel hechrach sheish bo'olam lavo gula. They're also part of. They have an element of necessity in this world that there'll be a geula. Every one of these kitzim represents a certain situation of the world, which brings us to a state that it can't get worse. In other words, what he's saying is like this: if there was a certain case, let's say, in the year 1492, right? People predicted that there's going to be a case. Right? He's saying what justified that, or what the basis for that was because there was an element in the way that the world was running, which at that year would come to its final point where it couldn't get worse. Right? Again, because in many different parts of the world, right? There's there's I don't know how the nations are treating us, how the Jews are behaving, how we're there's all kinds of different things that are happening, and we say in this you think about like strands in a rope, right? Right? In this particular strand, this particular little piece, right? This is going to come to the end in 1492, right? But that doesn't mean, so that's a time when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you know something? It's a good time for the cakes, right? Because in this particular element, we've come to the end of the rope. Right? In other elements, we haven't yet come to the end of the rope. So that's why it can continue. So the concept is like this. The cakes means that we've come to the end where where things can't get any worse. However, in different elements, things reach that point, right? The different points in history, right? And he says here, and with Elo sheklapi azman ahu shel haketz, regarding that case, that zman, yesh bekocho shel olam limshoch od ksat kadima. We can still move ahead, mimakom acher, because there's other elements which haven't yet come to the case. In other words, let's say just to say some kind of a structure here. In other words, let's say we have Torah, Avoda, and Gemilas Chasadim. So let's say that in the area of Avoda, we came to a case, but there's still Torah, there's still Gemilas Chasadim. I mean, in the area of Torah, we came to a case, right? Things like that. In the area of Midos, we've come to a case, and in certain areas we've come to a case. Things can get worse, but in other areas we can schlep a little bit longer. We can push it a little bit longer, right? At the final time of case, so that means that all of the different strands, all of the different little strings that make up this big rope will come to their end, and there won't be any hope of ever concluding. That's what Moshe is saying, is that each one of the kitzim corresponds to a certain deterioration in this world, which in that particular area things would get very bad, right? But that's not the end of the world, because there's other positive things that we could schlep along with. Right? That's what he's saying. I just want to. So that's the basic structure here. Again, that's why it's so important for us to understand. Kate Sam L'Choshech, right? And the Kate Sam L'Choshech means that the darkness is going to reach a point where it can't get any darker. Right? The Kate Sam L'Choshech means that, and that's the whole idea, that the Mashiach has only come when the whole Midas HaMalchus is completely destroyed, right? That's the end, right? So the darkness, right, is Kate Sam L'Choshech means that there's going to come a time when it can't get any darker. If it can't get any darker, so then it's built into the world that since the world has to have light to return to light, so when it can't get any darker, it's going to become light. Right? That's the situation. Along the way, there were different elements which where things got very dark, and we could have said, okay, now let's turn the whole thing into light, but that hasn't happened, and now we're still at the end where it is. Okay, now I just want to read in a few minutes left. We're not going to go weiter in the page, right? But just read from on the footnote here. There's a very interesting footnote on Chet, the bottom of Kuf Chav Daled. He talks about V'zel Lishon v'Sefer Netzach Chav Daled Shel Yigalu Asod. Right? Don't reveal the secrets. Okay. V'merush v'samach mashu shelo yigalu sodoteihan perish shelo yigalu Yisrael shum davar shehu sod etzlam lo yigalu lumot. Whatever is something which is internal knowledge of the Jewish people, we shouldn't be sharing with goyim. It's either we have things that are only for us to talk about, only for us to know about, right? And these are not things which we should be sharing. V'tam davar zeh, and he says a very interesting psychological point. Ki kol echad asher megales sodo le'acher. Anybody who reveals his secrets to another person, harei yesh lo chibur el ha'umot af b'davar nistar. Right? Then you have a connection on a much deeper level. Right? Whereas if I tell you my secrets, right, It means that I'm connected to you and right on a level which is deeper than if you just happen to know the superficial things about me, right? You sit some of you go to work with somebody, right? And what does he know? He knows your superficial facts, right? He knows what your name is, he knows where you live, he knows you can tell him how many kids you have, how many family, or who your mother is, where you went to school, all the kinds of superficial facts that public record and everybody can know them, and lo akhpat lecha if people know them, Rabbi, you're happy to have some kind of connection with another person, right? But what happens if you start revealing your secrets that really don't want people to know, or really that are things that are very personal, and because you develop a relationship with him, right? So then that relationship exists on a much deeper level than your stam relationship, right? He knows things about you, maybe you know things about him that nobody else knows, and this creates a very deep connection, right? So that's what the Maral says. That's what we're being warned against. Don't create such connections with the Umos Olam, with the Goyim. Right? If there's a secret that is known that belongs to the Jewish people about how we behave, about what we think, about how we understand the way the world works, right? That we have certain traditions, certain Kabbalah, certain things that happen. These are not things that we should be saying. Guess what we got? I have. This is a secret, of the Jewish people. I'm going to share it with you, and he's saying that's going to create a chibur, and that's a chibur. That's something which is bad, right? He says here on the fourth line of this paragraph. It's enough that we have to be subservient to them in the revealed things. Right? But we shouldn't be known, right? We shouldn't be under the almost and hidden things. This is something which is not appropriate, that we should have this kind of close relationship and let them know what's going on inside of us. There's a certain, Moshe talked about it before also, right? There's a certain la malshinim alti tikva. There's a certain things that we know, and right, good things and bad things sometimes, but these are things that are not meant to be shared. And he says, I'm skipping down just a number of lines, right? And this is going to something which is going to push off the Ketz. I'm here about 15 lines from the bottom. Right? 12. We're not going to go out. Because if we tell them about the Ketz, so then we're telling them about something which is on a high level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's control of the world. That's something that the Goyim have no control over whatsoever. The Goyim can put us into golus. They can make us work hard. They can persecute us. But the Ketz is something which transcends all of the reality of this world. And if we share with them information about the Ketz, so then so that we're completely subservient, even in the matters which are not meant to be shared. This pushes off the Ketz. Okay, so yeah, it's an interesting thing about being very careful about who and what we share. Right? That there's certain things that should be, just like. There's things that you know in your family, right? Families have secrets. Families, they know this. Families have secrets, right? And we're smart enough. Hopefully, we're smart enough not to share with people that will use them and manipulate them and give them control over us in negative ways. So we keep things secret. Right? So Am Yisrael has its secrets of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? Tznius, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be tzanua. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to broadcast. Right? Doesn't want us to put on our Facebook pages everything that we have, all of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to have Am Yisrael to be Am Levadad Yishkon, a nation that's unto itself. a nation that doesn't have a close kesher with any other nation, and trying to create that close kesher is going to be counterproductive because it's just going to make the golas, deepen the golas, and we don't want to deepen the golas. So as you interact, right, as some of us must, with people who are, different, not of the faith, not of the Yiddishkeit, we have to be careful about what we talk about and what we say. Okay, that's a general rule, a general principle. Okay, obviously, for particulars, you have to consult your local Orthodox rabbi. Beseder, okay, good. We'll stop here. I'm not sure what we're going to do next week. I guess we'll finish it. There's like 3 more pages. Okay, but okay. Mr. Hashem we'll finish talking about the Kates, by next week. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so everybody should have and anybody who reads the news, things are getting worse and worse. So we're on the way. Okay. Bezrat Hashem, and we should only hear Besaras Tovos and Yeshua's V'Nechamas. Okay, Kol Tov, thanks for joining, and everybody should have a good week. We'll see you, Mr. Hashem, next week. Kol Tov.